Welcome to the Broken Jars Broadcasting Network, home of the Dresden Files podcast, 42 Entertainment, and many others. More podcasts like this one can be found at brokenjars.xyz.
Hello everyone, this is episode 2 of High Fantasy, and I'm joined again by the two awesome people, Jacob and Colin.
Hey guys,
Hey.
We're back for episode 2.
Yeah. Yay! So, to start off every episode now, we're going to share what we have accomplished since last time. How many words we've written, or how many pages we've written, whatever sense of thing that we accomplished for accountability, for at least the three of us. And maybe other people will tweet at us or something to say what they accomplished, because I love talking to other people. So, to start off with myself, I wrote like a 1,200 word scene and hated it. So I scrapped it and wrote another like 800 words that have been really, really painful because I realized I don't know how to write combat. And I'm writing a combat story. So that's been my painful 2 weeks or so. Colin, what have you done?
I did 538 words about a week ago, and then earlier today realized that that's not the answer I wanted to go into this podcast with, so I wrote about another 1,200 earlier today.
Wow.
Damn.
Yeah.
Busted
It was
out.
finishing like one scene, and it was like a scene that I've already written 2 parts of, and I'm like, I'm just going to finish this stupid thing.
Yeah. I kept thinking, I need to write more because this is terrible. I need to write more. And then I just did nothing. So terrible me.
Yeah. this is
Jacob.
bad.
Well, since I actually handwrite everything, I don't really have a number of words, but I wrote about 15 pages. Introduced a new character, actually 2 new characters, and starting to get into the whole cyber part of, like, there's certain people who hate people who use, cybernetics or bots or whatever, and like starting to get into sort of that dynamic, and also starting to talk about the government of the solar system and why they're bad. Well, not really bad, just sort of douchebags.
Yeah.
Like they're not the evil
Conflict.
government. They're just government, you know.
Sounds like rebel propaganda.
So yeah, I was pretty happy with what I got the last 2 weeks. It's been flowing really well, so that's exciting. Like I haven't had
Yes.
any time where I've just like sat down and just couldn't do anything. Like every time I put
that-
pen to paper, it
that's
just
good.
works. So that's very exciting.
I plan everything out just so I don't have those moments, and I still have those moments because I didn't realize how much I didn't know about military combat. So I'm on to research again for the umpteenth time. But on to the topic of this episode. It's kind of a little bit of what Jake was going on to, like getting into the world of the story. Is we are talking about world building. And world building is, the general universe that you're working in, and that is why we love fantasy and sci-fi. That's why we have magic. It's why we have different planets and like robo-cops and artificial guns and dragons and all the awesome things that draw us to those genres.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And it's also, I think, one of the things we can kind of get into is sort of world building, sub-world building, especially when you have different planets. You have to rebuild planets and locations over and over again because they're completely different from the place you were at last time, so it might be a fun topic to try to get into.
Yeah. But on the general, largest, zoomed-out scale, world building in terms of storytelling is just the themes and the laws of the story that you're working with. So a Jane Austen book also has world building, and how the story is going to go by certain laws that she writes by, and laws of just the setting that she chooses, because all the setting and world building is what it is. So
And I think if a lot of, especially like fantasy sci-fi people, are honest, we write stories because we want to build the world and then just play inside of it. That's really why we write.
yeah, because I want to torture people inside of my pretty little world.
You're a mean
But-
woman, you know that? You scare
It's
me.
fun!
Like, you're the kind of, I know this is a little off track, but you're that kind of woman that, like, if you were dating, you'd be a little scared. I would be scared that you would stab me at some point. Like, just, that's who you
No.
are.
Oh no, I'm really sweet and caring to the person I'm in a relationship with, I swear.
Anyway, back on
Okay.
topic.
Yes. So, like, let's start off with listing all of the different ways that you can do world building, like the different aspects of setting that you can add an original spin to, especially if it is a source of conflict in some way. Like, geography is a big one, especially if you're like sci-fi, you're working with different planets. Is this planet actually livable or not? Are you crash landing on something that's going to kill you in 20 minutes? Or
Right.
anything like that. You have to worry about geography and terrain and atmosphere, and all of those things are definite sources of conflict if you want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, keep
Uh,
listing them, my guys.
Governments, ruling powers, easy one. Creates a lot of conflict. Creates world resources, especially for like sci-fi dystopia, tends to be a big one.
Yeah, like what is valuable? What is a resource that everyone has and they don't care about? What is a resource that nobody has and therefore they'll pay a lot for, even if we don't consider it very like expensive? Like I don't know, silica. Silica's everywhere. It's basically what the planet is made of. But if they don't have it, then they can't like make glass and things like that.
Mhm.
Like the governments, like are they absolutely evil? Are they wonderful? Are they saints? Are they wonderful shades of gray that do uncomfortable things for good reasons? How do they get in power? How do they stay in power? How does the culture affect it? And
Right. And another big one is currency, and like it's always fun to kind of shift things with that because I was writing this zombie story. It didn't go very well, but it was called "Blowjobs for Bullets." And it was all about how basically in the zombie apocalypse, bullets are the most valuable thing in the world, so people pay for it. So actually, the most powerful people were the hookers at the Bunny Ranch who sucked and fucked their way to a mountain of bullets. And so, like, the entire story is this guy trying to get to Vegas because that's apparently where, like, the safest place is.
And you hit on human instinct that bullets might be the most valuable thing, but that's a blowjob, and that's what I want right now.
Exactly.
And I'm going to give up the most precious resource I have for that.
And I did that before I played the Metro games, because in that game, bullets are currency, so I didn't steal that. That was... I played that game afterwards, so... Anyone listening going like, oh, you stole that? Like, no, I didn't.
well, I mean, that at least makes sense because I remember in the Fallout games they use bottle caps and stuff. It's like, who gives a shit about bottle caps? It's like it didn't make sense to me, and it didn't like have a value attached to it the way that our dollar does because of other complex things. I'm not going to try to explain. But it has.
Like they just leave. Like you can find soda bottles everywhere that are full that you can drink. That then give you bottle caps, and it's like, well, why did no one else take this before me?
Yeah, it's like, why do you care if it's, if you can find it anywhere? It is a strange thing for them to do, but I guess it's something that you're going to hand wave away, and you're trying to just make a game. It doesn't have to be crucially important. Like, the family structure of your planet does not have to be crucial to the story, but if it is, you need to think about it, and you need to make sure that it seems what it should be. If it needs to be foreign and alien, then, do it that way. Do your original spin in some way to it. But if it's not important, then you can just leave it blank or stick to something that's really familiar and therefore generic and therefore we're not going to really pay attention to it. Our eyes are just going to like glaze over it.
And that's world builder's disease in a nutshell.
Yep.
World builder's disease, and when you have to make everything detailed and original and you get stuck doing it for 20 years instead of writing a book.
Just acknowledge that that's not important enough to your story, and you can hand wave it away, and the reader's not going to care.
Right.
Yeah.
Move on to the actual writing.
Yes. Which is the general theme of any writing advice, is just actually fucking write it.
Which is why after I finished talking with you today, and I'm like, yeah, there's still clearly things to work out here, but I'm going to go fucking write.
Good. All right, so more things of culture that we can, delve into way too much is like, how is gender handled? Are they the normal male-female gender type things? Are they equal? Are they very patriarchal? Are they matriarchal? How is inheritance handled between all of this? Maybe they have like 4 genders and it's completely normal. Maybe they're not even human, in which case you probably need to get into biology and how do things reproduce? How do they have 4 genders if they're aliens? and blah, 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 all of this.
Right.
Just
That's something.
Make sure it matters.
The gender thing is something I've been struggling with. I'm like, part of me doesn't really want to deal with the whole, like, really fluid,
Gender fluid.
and all
things.
that stuff. I'm like, that just seems like a distraction to the story. I mean, I know for some stories it's very important, but I'm like, maybe I'm just like too worried about like PC people coming after me. Like, if I don't do it, people are gonna hate me. But if I do it, other people are gonna hate me. So I don't. Those are some of the things I think about when I think about, especially in terms of like gender and how that works.
Yeah. And it's interesting when getting into ideas of diversity. Like, if you are on an Earth-like planet, are you going to have Earth-like races in terms of, you have white people, you have Asian people, you have black people, brown people, red people, all of these things. If you have them, you need to probably show them in some way, or at least provide a good reason why they're not there, for whatever reason. If you're on a completely made-up planet, maybe you don't need to have Asian people. But then there are a few people that are going to be really, really angry that their Asian brothers and sisters are not shown. It's a fantasy book. It's not Earth. And that's a controversy that goes back and forth and back and forth. And we're going to talk about it in its own episode at some point.
What do you think about never being specific? Like, sort of allowing as them to insert the races or the races on their own. Like, you never really talk about skin color. You never assign someone as black or white or Asian. You just kind of allow the reader to place their idea of who they think this person is.
That can be very interesting, especially when there's a controversy that comes up from it. Like, I think in Hunger Games, Rue was only described as dark, and then everyone assumed they're black, which is cool. But maybe she wasn't actually black. Maybe she was Indian.
Right.
But granted, that story takes place in the U.S. a broken time later. That it makes much more likely for her to be black, and that makes perfect sense. But if you leave it very ambiguous, people are going to project their own things on it. So maybe everyone's just white, everyone is yellow, or whatever. And it's an interesting thing to do because you can do that with general descriptions anyway. If you say that is the most beautiful woman alive, they will create their own most beautiful woman, and it will be better than anything you can describe.
Yep.
So there is a very good place to use that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, like, people want detail. The people like me, I really want to know how the biology of that alien species works. I want to know how that gun has
once you get an
infinite
alien,
packaging.
then it's a whole other ballgame, right? I mean, they're not
Yes.
humans.
It's very interesting, especially if the idea of, like, but the races are just caricatures and they're all the same.
Yeah.
And that's, like, everything is really, like, you described everything a little bit and everything is really shallow. And that's a big problem sometimes, or at least it kills the enjoyment for me when every dwarf is just a Scottish drunkard. I mean, Scottish people are hilarious when they're drunk, but it's just, like...
And then we get
Give
sued
depth
by
to them.
Scotland.
They've
They've got their own
Alex
problems
is a
right now.
racist towards Scottish people.
Oh, no, it's okay if it's white people. You can always do bad things to white people. I should shut up.
Okay, so
Is that vodka?
No.
that'd
swear it's not.
be fun. Okay, so here's a question to pose. What's some interesting decisions you have made in what you're currently writing that has really informed the world? Like, did you make any rules that you're like, okay, this world must be X way, and that has changed things one way or the other?
I made aliens invade planet Earth in, like, year 2048 or something.
Okay.
Maybe 2045, something in there. And then the story takes place in 2070s. So, it's had 30 years or so to stew, and that's the setting I'm starting with. It's changed everything, but I can't describe everything, so...
I have spent hours upon hours of the intricacies of the structure of my nobility in my city because it plays a big part of that dynamic of the characters, and no matter what I do, it just never feels right.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Like, maybe it's perfectly fine, but it just doesn't feel right because it's a construct you made. And that's something I get into as well. But
I feel like I trying to find too many answers that readers aren't going to be asking.
World building disease.
Look, we're all
Just
nerds
write it.
here. We all know that someone will ask that question.
But do I care that they did?
Well, that's a whole other issue. One of the interesting things that me and Ryan decided is that we wanted everything to be, even though it's not like a hard sci-fi, we wanted everything to be real. Actually have like real scientific underpinnings, the whole thing. And what that did, one interesting thing that brought up for this first book is most of it takes place on Saturn's moon of Titan. And because of that rule, I had to figure out what the sun is like on Titan. And our sun is as 10th as strong on Titan as it is here. So you have to figure out alternative light sources because they don't have light like we have light, So, and so there's all sorts of theories and stuff about microsuns and all sorts of cool shit. So like, even just like trying to stay with reality makes things different,
Yeah, you can do one small change, and it can affect everything else.
Yeah. So like,
And
so it also brings in.
yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Keep going.
So it also brings in this whole dynamic of so the really rich planets can build many suns, where the really poor planets can't, and so they're in darkness all the time, or they're biodomes that do all this weird stuff. Because if you ever watch a lot of sci-fi, almost every planet has sort of a normal day-night schedule, and that just doesn't happen in reality.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about something that's a different size than Earth, and therefore they're going to be going faster or maybe slower depending on how fast they're spinning.
Right.
And
or a moon,
yeah.
So it's where how it sees the sun is different because it's got to go around so it's got two rotations it's got to deal with, the rotation around the planet and its own rotation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always like those kind of fantastical sci-fi images that you're standing, if you see the terrain of one planet and you see like 3 planets up in the background, and like, I don't know, those are always really fun. And I have no idea of how to do a story that actually justifies it because I want to make sure that it does seem real. And if I do that, there's no way that you can live on a planet that's close. Because if you are on something that's really close to Saturn, it's huge, and Saturn's going to be fucking with you. And I don't know how to make that feel right.
Yeah.
Those planets would have probably collided with each other a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So kitties,
And-
don't
but
ever
they're so
write about
pretty.
space. So that's something I have learned writing this book. Don't ever write about space.
I avoid sci-fi. It
Well-
takes so much more research.
Well, especially because then you have to, like, when you're dealing with travel, you have to start thinking about, if it's going to be
How does
real.
it work? How long does it take?
Not even
How
that,
costly is it?
that, and it's also you have to deal with orbital rotations. So maybe during part of some time you can actually visit these other planets because the rotations are good, but other times it's so far away you can't. So that, even that little bit, I mean, that really can change the story a whole lot. Being, just considering that sometimes you can do this and some other times you can't. It kind of gives an old-timey feel about, it used to take forever to travel places. So people go places for a decade, then come back, and that was normal. So it kind of gives you that kind of element too. So
Have you two
Yeah,
seen
and-
Force Awakens?
yes.
Yes.
That movie completely hand-waved the time it takes for space travel completely away.
Yep.
That movie has some serious problems.
But it's also
Everything
they
else.
also have they also have FTL travel, and that once you have FTL, you can really just kind of hand wave.
Star Wars already established their speed of FTL. And then that movie just pretended like everyone's next door neighbors.
Right? Which is
I mean, okay, to a certain extent, there is something to be said for travel can just be like glossed over, time skip it. Just time skip it. Don't describe traveling for half a book. I'm going to put it down. Ugh. But it has to still feel like there's a time. If you have one sentence he falls asleep, the next sentence he wakes up, it doesn't feel like a lot of time, which can be really good for your pacing, or it can be really bad for your pacing. So if there needs to be a slower part between 2 action scenes or something, you don't need to fill it with travel necessarily, but you can have something else taking place during the travel like a really important conversation or something else that's going on. And then we can be focusing on that, and it feels like there has been a bunch of time in between them because we've been reading a bunch of things in the middle. Even if it only took 5 minutes, you can stretch 5 minutes to 500 pages. Trust me. So it depends on execution, as well as other things and how you decide to build the capabilities. Yeah, it should be a Broken Jar super fight when we talk about Force Awakens because everybody has strong opinions on it, but...
Except for me, I don't really have a lot of strong opinions about it. It's a B+, and that's about what I really care about it.
The travel hurt me.
The travel was tough. The travel was
No.
Especially when they had things happening in different solar systems at the same time.
Yeah.
And then
You have
traveling
to
back and forth
explain
between
things. Let's go on with
don't dig
the
yourself.
list, the convenient list I've set up of what were the schedule. Let's get back to that. So, in terms of capabilities and stuff, if you have travel, you need to take care of it. And if you are stuck by horse and carriage, then you figure out how long it takes to actually travel by horse and how big your planet is if you're making your own one, because tons of fantasy authors make their own maps and stuff. And then you say, it took a week to get from this city to that city. It's like, is that actually true? Is that how long it would take? Do some basic research in figuring that out and figure out how big your planet is and populations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I had to do a lot of that because there's a part that I haven't rewritten yet where he takes a train. So I had to figure out how fast that train was moving to make sure he got there in 8 hours, from point to point. So, like, how fast is this train moving? This is sort of like, okay, I need him to get from A to B. Then you go research and figure out how long it takes, and then you kind of fill in the details around that.
Yeah, and as part of my story, they get into an airship and then they travel from Switzerland to the Philippines. How long does that take? How long does it take right now? And how much can I just, like, they're super sci-fi and do even further. So I think it would take like 4 hours using the fastest plane available to the Air Force right now.
To get from Switzerland to the Philippines, damn.
In the fastest plane that they have. Then I'm going to cut it down.
Going supersonic, it wouldn't take that long to get there, especially if you can get high enough.
Yeah, but if you get higher, then it takes, more distance to travel. There's a problem. I don't know. I have a part in my notebook sketched out, like how long it would take, I think, and I'm just going to handle it to like half of the time because I want them to be technologically capable of that. Now, it doesn't actually matter to me in the story how long it takes. I just need it to feel advanced. So that's one of the ways I'm showing that they are advanced is by thinking that the travel is really short. And other things about that. So I'm going to jump back to culture because I don't know what else to talk about right now. Like, how do you have birth and death handled? How do you have coming of age handled? Because that's a huge part in an entire genre called YA, is how do you come of age and what do you do in the world in the middle of it?
You're super robotic, Alex. You should probably turn off your video. You're just like super robotic. Okay, see if that helps. Okay,
everything better?
Start over. Yes, it sounds a lot better.
Okay, starting off on the culture, how do you handle birth and death?
I don't, at least not right now, personally.
I have not thought about it in the slightest for my story.
Considering you have important people dying, you probably should figure that out.
But not every culture treats death like a... They all have their rituals, but not all of them are large ceremonies.
That's true, but they do deal with them in some way.
True.
And like, if anything, you could just these people cremate everything so they don't have to deal with the space and leave it at that. And then that's fine. Otherwise, you could just we put him in the crypt. And just a simple thing like that can make it seem much more in depth.
Yeah.
And I don't know. If it's important, what happens when a baby is born? Do they have a special naming ceremony or, I don't know, a circumcision like Judaism does or blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts of things.
Coming of age rituals and birth rituals seem more in line in societies that your survival isn't guaranteed.
It's true.
So if you've got an established culture that life is pretty stable, you're not going to put as much emphasis on those rituals.
That, I suppose, is true. But even in, Western Earth, we have an interesting emphasis on high school and going to college, and we kind of view that as a coming of age, even if we are pretty stable. Like, we still have these pedigrees that we use. Just like, yep, I'm an established adult now. So there's always something there.
That good did us.
See, I mean, granted, since I'm not really totally creating a brand new world, I've had this idea and thought that now that information is perpetual, that a lot of humanity sort of gets stuck, so it doesn't evolve as much. So 500 years in the future, a lot of the same institutions are still around, universities, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I'm handling that.
Yeah, that's a good one. But although the whole EU thing lately, it's like maybe the EU is going to collapse in the next 10 years, and then that's going to fuck over everything.
It'll collapse in 5, but that's a whole other thing.
I don't know.
UK will
I gave
collapse
it time.
first.
To what?
The UK will collapse first.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But that's actually another part of. It seems important to always think of how history is affected in your world building. If you
Yes.
have a magic system, let's say in a fantasy world, how has that magic system affected any of the history? Because this is something that really bothered me in the Avatar cartoon show, Last Airbender, is that, okay, they have these magic abilities. That's cool, and I like what they do with it, but it really felt underdeveloped. And then they did develop in Legend of Korra, in which these people are being able to use their magic abilities to make factories. That's how their factories run, is people doing lightning shit instead of using like electricity generators. And that is what I was hoping for in Avatar, because it just felt underused. They didn't progress and let the simulation develop and see what comes out of it. They just kind of kept it in its baby stage. And it bugged me. So it's like, if you have this thing and you have it established that it shows up here, then it's going to affect it all throughout history. And if it doesn't, then you need to really explain why. Because then you get into issues of like medieval stasis trope, in which everything is medieval Europe, even 1,000 years later, when technology progresses.
Or even if your initial magic system could make you surpass medieval technology instantly, and yet for some reason no one has thought of that application.
Yes, and you need to explain why, or take care of in some way that it's not going to do that. Yeah, I mean, in Mistborn, Sanderson handled that. It's like, there's the Lord Ruler, who is like the most powerful person, and he keeps it in medieval stasis because he's just kind of that way, and that's why they've stayed the same way for 500 years, 1,000 years.
And he knows the danger of not keeping it that way. Spoiler alert.
But
I was going to say, I know I trashed on Assassin's Quest last time, as much as I like the Farseer trilogy overall. But the magic in that system is very simple. The things they can do with it, and just the site or whatever they call it, it's been a while since I read it. And yet, she shows you how such a basic magic system can basically turn the tides, and they all get the application of it, as simple as it is, and they use that to its maximum potential, and that makes them militarily stronger than they should be.
yeah, that's a good way of, like, they did one small thing, but if you use it really well, then you can have like really big changes. And that was a very good example. There are examples of people doing world building in a kind of, it's like everything has something original on it, but it's very shallow, kind of like I was saying with Avatars. One thing that bugged me in the Stormlight Archive of Sanderson's is the idea of showing your left hand as a woman past puberty age is immodest. It's vulgar. So everyone, if you're highborn, they have like a sleeve that just goes way farther than your hand, and you're not supposed to use it for anything. If you're lowborn, then you like use a glove to cover it, and you still go about your work. But there is no explanation as to why a left hand is immodest. Is that the one that you jack off your husband with or something? I don't know. But
But you're
it
also
just
applying
drove
like
me crazy.
there's certain things that are considered immodest in today's society that really have no business being immodest. You know.
For the most part, it's the parts that are sexual, not your left hand.
Or it was just the more you're showing, like, we initially considered anything really visible as provocative, and we slowly pushed our boundaries.
Yeah, so
Why
it
would
seems
they
like
hang?
current day, it's just, the actual sexual parts. But just the left hand, it didn't make any sense, especially when you have a right one on the other side. It should look pretty much identical.
Right,
God,
but it's just an odd, like it's just an odd thing that there's certain things in society you
Err
just
on
can't
the side of
explain. They
muscle.
just are, you know.
But he didn't explain it, and it felt wrong.
I swear Sanderson falls victim to his own trope of an ocean an inch deep a lot of times,
Yes.
especially in Stormlight. He contradicts himself in
That is exactly what
being
the
so
left-hand thing
expansive in his world, and yet half the time he just kind of skips out on explaining things. And like the major world, Kolar, whatever the
Yeah, something like that.
Like, in the Stormlight Archives, we never see a major culture in action because they're all too busy at war. Like, the only time we ever see the major countries they're on the Shattered Plains fighting. So all these established cultural things we never see in their regular practice, so we don't get the context of them sometimes. So, I mean, I think he just goes for too much at once, but at the same time, he's writing a story where you're learning the culture out of its own context, so that can also be confusing.
Yeah, was interesting that he showed how the culture was changing because they'd been at war in this certain area for so long. They basically created a second capital. In fact, it had more people than the original capital because they had so many soldiers there. And then he did the cool thing with his magic system of explaining how they could feed everyone there, which is, the magic system affecting your world building is huge, and I don't know, skip that hold up a little bit.
You really cut off the entire importance of the rest of your nation if you can self-provide supplies.
Yeah. And all of this is a good point for conflict. I'm going to skip to something that we haven't really mentioned, is language. Some part of the world building is the language that people are speaking. Like, if everyone is speaking gobbledygook, and then just leave it at that, that's good, cool. Or you can have conflict in that everyone's speaking a different language and no one can talk to each other. And then, what are people's names? Is everyone just like Bob, Jared, John, Chuck, things that are normal?
Standard, slight change.
Yeah, or they keep them consistent with each other, because things of the same culture should feel the same consistency. If you are making all of them up, then they should feel like they belong in the same culture language. Or you can have things really alien and, show everything that you want with all of it. The names of places are really good as well, especially like if you think of things named in English, it's like High Cliff. It's really simple. It's a descriptor. But if you hear that in German, I have no idea what the German is, it sounds so much more alien, and it's cool. Yeah. And then there's also, that affects the words you choose in the prose, because if you use a word that they would never use, then it's going to stand out and jar the reader. Yeah. One last thing I guess I want to mention before we talk into magic systems specifically is, how is warfare handled? How is military structured? Depending on the kind of time frame you want to model after, like Roman legionnaires are going to be modeled after Roman times and their capabilities. And then there's also, like, if you want to push it forward to Napoleonic times and all of that, how do you do it? And you can use these models, you can make them up on your own, but it's something that's big, especially since so many stories involve war. And then if you're doing like futuristic things, like what I'm doing is I'm taking what I know of modern things and then just kind of sticking with it, sort of. So how do magic systems affect world building?
Actually,
Any and all of the things that we mentioned.
Before we get really into magic, I want to bring up technology maybe a bit, because in certain stories, technology is basically used the same way as magic, right? So one of the things I've been kind of dealing with, and I would like some opinion in terms of world building, is so especially for things that tend to happen in the future, there's this idea that technology every type of technology increases at the same rate or same pace. So what do you think about the idea, maybe you can do this with magic, of certain technologies outpacing others? So you get to a point 500 years in the future where you have nanites, but other things are still not nearly as advanced as that. Because if you look at certain things like cell phone technology in the last 15 years has gone crazy, so has TV, but there's other technologies that haven't. I mean, internal combustion engine is still just an internal combustion engine for the most part, So what do you think about like movement and changes in like tech and magic that don't always pace with each other?
I mean, I think that's an interesting aspect of something to choose to do, is especially in any way that you want to build conflict out of it, which is the point of the story. But if, for example, you have one system that is very offensive and then the kind of corresponding system that's very defensive, you can have an interesting situation, hypothetically, that the defensive progressed so much more that the offensive became obsolete. So everyone has expert defenses to the point that it's better to just bash each other with a stick than do super magic offense because everyone's already defending against it. And it can be neutralizing in that way. Or if the defensive never works and then offensive is so disastrous that wars change very differently. And I like when you have a disparity like that, especially if you show a different subsection of people or cultures that excelled in different ways, and like the different prowesses between those subsets. It's a good way of showing culture, and I think it's a very human thing to do, in the way, a real life thing to do. It's like, I can't imagine the progression of cell phones. Smartphones is just kind of mind-boggling, and I don't know how it could possibly get better, and I don't know how other people who are creating them can think if they possibly get better. So I think at some point you're going to hit like a wall of how awesome they can be, and it makes perfect sense to me that something's just kind of reach its point and stay there.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of something I've been dealing with, and trying to get my head around is, okay, what do I want to progress and what do I want to be lagging behind?
Yeah.
Because there is the idea, and I think you could even do this with like a magic system, where certain abilities are really progressed by people. If you think of it as sort of like a martial art, so like people think that the Kung Fu magic is a lot better than the Muay Thai magic. So no one really studies the Muay Thai magic, but then you have this one person who's really great at it and just sort of upsets the apple cart. Yeah, in that way. So that would be a really interesting world-building thing to do with magic, I think.
Yeah, and there's also like everyone is stuck in one system, and then someone with something completely different comes in and can obliterate them because it's something they've never seen before, which is kind of what happened with Mongolian invasion into Japan. Only like 12 Mongols made it to Japan, but they kind of obliterated the Japanese soldiers because they just fought more viciously. And take things from history that you think are cool, add it into your own thing with your spin on it, and that's a good way to get situations.
Right, exactly. So it's something I've been thinking about and trying to get some stuff on.
Yeah, but basically do whatever you want to do, and if anything, maybe you need to go back and provide reasons. But write the story that you want to write. You don't need to work everything to its last detail, and then you get the ocean an inch thick that Sanderson can fall into, as well as anyone else who's not paying attention. Yeah.
Fair enough.
All right, so on to magic systems. I mean, we're not talking about how to build a magic system here. We're talking about how it affects like the world building and the history. Like if you have the ability to make a dot on a wall, what is something that you can do with that? And Sanderson's third law, I think it was, is expand what you have before adding something new. So how many things can you do with the ability to make a dot on a wall. Like, if anything, if it's permanent, then you don't need painters anymore. Everyone just has the dot ability. Or maybe only one person does, in which you have painters again. Whatever. If you have the ability,
really rich painting.
yeah, if you have the ability to it's an infinite magazine, then bullet people are probably going to die. You know, bullet manufacturers. And it's all really important, especially if, like, does magic have a cost in fuel, in finances? Does it cost money to do magic?
Or is there some kind of focus that is needed to do it, and that could be an extra cost too?
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort
Can
of
you make money?
Right, but like in the Harry Potter world, they all have to have like wands and shit, right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
Or it's like with Dresden, at least, then you have, it just costs personal, like, energy, in which, you know, you need to sleep at some point, eat a good meal, and then go back to fighting. And that's a good fuel that you need to talk about as well. Or you can make money. Say again, Colin?
Same thing with Wheel of Time. Of not only are you limited in your magical ability, but you're also limited in your physical fatigue.
Mm-hmm. I kind of like it when you run it up to the point, if I do anything more, it's going to kill me, because, you know, tension, just make my characters suffer that way.
Did Harry Potter put any... Was there any limit on Harry Potter magic?
Not that I can remember.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, if there was, it was like this important. You know, it was like super not important because it really didn't come up at all.
Mm-hmm.
They also couldn't do unbelievably amazing things constantly.
Yeah. Which has been an interesting thing. Like, so they show time turners in the one book that they're important, and then they never ever talk about it again, even though it could fix everything. Like, so we can't go back and save someone. We can't, change history for the better. But you can take extra classes. Yeah, that's fine. Which is just kind of absurd. But it's something that kind of had a problem within Harry Potter, is the fact that why can't they use this? Why won't they use it? And it felt like they didn't explain it perfectly. And then in the fifth book, they just destroyed them all and took care of them that way. It's like, okay, now you're not able to, but still.
Wait, they destroyed all the time turners in the fifth book?
Yeah, when they're running around Order of the Phoenix stuff, it's at the end, they're all destroyed.
Interesting. That's when I quit. That's when I quit reading. Was the fifth book.
Oh, that was like my favorite. I think. I don't remember.
I can't do J.K. Rowling. She just drives me up a fucking wall.
Just listen to Stephen Fry's audiobook of it.
No, I did. That's how I did Harry Potter, was those audiobooks. And by the end, like, it took everything in me to get through Goblet of Fire, which is my favorite one. But I was like, just shut the fuck up, woman. I just kept going and going. But yeah.
I'm just looking at the Wikia. Obviously, it's a time travel thing, so they're very hesitant to use it for the obvious. Let's not get into time travel conversation.
Yes.
It's impossible to deal with. Also, apparently, in the fifth book, they accidentally knocked one of them over, and it therefore brought the entire room into a time paradox of endless looping on its own. So it just got stuck.
Why didn't she mention that in the book? Because that's hilarious.
I know.
What? I like those things. I like kind of messing with time, and it's a very good way of doing a very small change that affects everything if you don't want to actually world build everything else.
Oh, it says it was mentioned in that book, but I don't know when.
Probably at the end.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. All right. So, going back to magic, if you have the ability to make something explode, guess what? You're going to get drafted by the military, probably, or it's going to be used in some way. It's going to be used in warfare, and you need to explain all of that.
Or Fulminocist.
Yes, Fulminocist is pretty good at that. Or just like Codex Alera, if everyone has the abilities to do magic, then how do you use it with strategy? I think he did a really good job showing how the Furies are used in a siege in, I can't remember which book, but like, okay, the water people are putting water into the cracks of the walls, and then they're going to freeze it and try to make it bigger and like actually bring the wall down that way, which I thought was so cool. You know, he thought about it. It was wonderful.
And he took like the idea of Roman roads being so effective and then made a new explanation for why they're even more effective than they were.
Yeah. And Codex Lyra is pretty good. Jim Butcher's really good at what he does.
I couldn't get through it. It
Mine
feels
is
so
the-
bad.
The first 3 books of Dresden struggle, but just get by them.
Oh, I love Stormfront. I mean, it's still a top 3 favorite Dresden book for me. Love Stormfront.
No, just
Absolutely.
you
love
can't
it.
get through Codex Lyra.
No, I think it's the reader. I think it's the issue. Like, because I pretty much all the books I read are audiobooks. So if the reader sucks, I just can't get through them.
Just read it on Kindle. Just just do it that way. Trust me, it's awesome.
Maybe. I'm still trying to
And-
get through the new one. Crap. What's
Fires?
Cinder
Spires?
Spires, yeah.
Still haven't gotten to that.
God damn it.
I'm in the middle. I know, I'm trying to write steampunk, and I haven't read any steampunk.
You need to just read that one because it's good.
It's
like
not steampunk.
that is good
It's
steampunk.
not steampunk. It's not steampunk.
It has airships. This is the definition of steampunk.
No, there's no steam. You've got to have steam to be steampunk.
Well, they have like the crystals and the electricity and that's
Yeah,
how
I
they do
mean,
it.
it's
So that's like a
definitely sort of
staple
like
steampunk idea.
steampunk-like, but it's not steampunk.
It's steampunk.
It's not steampunk.
Because apparently, if you're doing world building in some way, you're also going to fall into genres based on it. Stay aware of that. You can have magic and sci-fi because I'm totally gonna, but people are going to want to classify everything like we were talking about in episode 1.
And don't be afraid to fall into a genre. Some people want to like transcend and do all this other stuff. It's like, well, look, there's a genre for everything. Just embrace it. And if you need to embrace some of the tropes, sometimes it helps you actually do that.
Yeah. Tropes are totally good as long as you explain them, because otherwise they just feel cheap. Like, why medieval stasis? Oh, Lord Ruler is forcing it to stay that way. That's fine. And tropes are good because they sell. They became tropes because that's what sold often enough that it became known everywhere.
They're classics for a reason.
Yeah. And, it's totally okay to just fall back on a trope, especially if you're writing a short story in which you don't want to expend a lot of words describing something. Just like, it's an inn. Everyone fills it in on their own thing, and it's fine. And it can be the classic fantasy inn, and it's perfect. It's just, be aware of it. Make conscious decisions of what you're doing. That's a big thing, I guess. Just know what you're doing when you do it, even if you don't know how to do it, I guess.
Right. So I agree with that. So what are some... I mean, we talked about, like, how to do some of this stuff. What are some of the more fun things? Like, you're talking about, like, changing that one little thing that can change your entire universe. Like, what are some of the more fun things you can change to, spice up your universe?
I think religion is a big thing because, like, recent thing of Game of Thrones, like, the bad guy is apparently the religious guy, and I hate him. It can be stereotypical, like, the religious guy is the bad guy, woohoo, and then the religious guy is the good guy, like Michael Carpenter. You can do a ton of things with it, but the culture that the religion shapes can have a lot of weird aspects to it, with pretty much every part of culture, like birth and death and how they do burials and what they pray to, what they swear as. Swear words are huge, and I don't know how to do them well.
It's because no matter how you do them, they always tie into religion, and then you find yourself building a whole new religion just to justify the swear words.
And that's fine, I guess. Just write your damn story. But, okay, there are some times that I love Sanderson's writing. There are some times I hate it. And the storms as a bad thing, his curse word that he uses constantly, I can't do it.
I would somewhat say that the less common, like the less realistic your things are, like he makes perfectly fine justification for using the word storms as a curse word.
But when it's backwards.
But when it's not a natural, like when it's not something that's innately Earth-like and something that he has to explain, don't use it as often as he does.
Yeah, he uses it a lot. But, I mean, I think in a different story, which I haven't read, he uses colors, or was that Warbreaker? I don't remember. Okay, Warbreaker I think was my favorite of his, just because it was the most polished, and it was so pretty in my head. But when you do curse words, make them feel real, which is one of the things I think Codex Lyra did awesome, is that he just talked about crows. Because they're carrion eaters, they show up on the battlefield, and they're bad things. They show up and people die. And it felt real, and the way he used it was good. He also used, like, fuck and shit and whatever, which is nice. It feels real when they do the real words, you know? Obviously. I in the fantasy story I was writing, I had no idea what to do as a curse word, so I just made up some shit, and I'll keep it in there until I fix it later.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And it never felt real. It did, because I realized a couple days ago I never built the religion, even though I needed to. Because that gives a justification for swear words, like Colin said.
It never ends.
Yeah.
I like Malazan did something where, like, he'll drop the F-bomb every once in a while to tell you that shit is serious. But at the same time, most of his curses are things that are illogical to say. So, like, he'll take the random gods and then curse at their balls or their attributes. And since they're gods, like, they don't actually have balls. And that's the whole point of making the joke, is that these things don't exist. But at the same time, when he really wants to make the point, he'll just go back to a regular swear word that we recognize and realize, okay, now we're serious.
Yeah, that's a good execution in that way. Like, if you can use it as, like, this is the marker that you're going to pay attention to, so I'm going to use it, it's a good tool in whatever you do. So when Michael Carpenter says, "God damn you, you son of a bitch," I pay attention. But, so what's a fun thing for you, Jacob, that you like to build?
What do you mean?
Oh, like, you're asking us, like, what's the fun thing that you build the world, like, to mess with?
Oh, I'm trying to think. You know, I've tried to do different things. I would say right now one of the more fun things that I'm building and, like, changing is what we think about, like, robotics technology. You know, like, I have, in the second episode that I wrote and never published, you know, I have, like, fluid tattoos. So it's like robots, you basically nanites that sit on top of the skin, and so you can have, like, programmable tattoos that flow and do crazy things, and so that's been fun, like playing with, like, like the nanite technology and thinking of, like, the really weird shit you can do with it.
Cool, because if anything, fluid tattoos, just like, I want to look like this today.
Right.
Cool.
So like at least in this in the story I wrote that, again, never got published, you know, the girl in the episode, because there's always a girl. That's just one of those things I know about me when it comes to writing. There's always going to be a girl. She's got, like, you know, she's super rich and she can afford, like, 5 programmable designs. And so, like, when they were implanting her, they, you know, she could pick 5 designs and they would program the bots to do those things.
Interesting.
That's unnerving.
What's unnerving?
Something on my skin doing its own thing.
Well,
Yeah, because if you actually see a mole, like, start moving on you, it's skin cancer.
But in this world, you know, a lot of people have bots, you know, nanites of some kind. So there's, like, Medibots and all sorts of other stuff. So it's a normal day-to-day thing, which may or may not actually happen, but it's, you know, in this story, it's a normal everyday thing for people to have bionic eyes, arms, legs, whatever, or nanites, depending. So
Colin, you share something.
Something I enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
I spend way too much time in political machinations and character relations. So I built my entire nobility structure around the idea of these people not getting along and what that would look like on a hierarchical scale. So I built the nobility, the important ones, and then knew ahead of time that I wanted them to fight with each other, and how much of an impact would that have on the world if their leaders are constantly infighting?
Yeah, it's fun, you know, because I like working on people's relationships so I can torture them. Like,
You are so evil.
it's fun though. I mean, like, you really care about your brother. I'm gonna put your brother in danger and leave you to have a panic attack.
You need to stop reading so much Jim Butcher. That's just all there is to it. You need to read someone who's like nice to his characters.
I don't read anyone who's nice to his characters.
I couldn't be someone nice to their characters.
Okay, we're getting close to our hour, so I think I'm going to throw out one more question, if you don't mind.
All right.
We've all had issues building worlds and doing all these things we've been talking about. So what are some pitfalls you've seen and sort of ways to get around those pitfalls when world building? Alex?
A pitfall, I guess, is not actually making it original. Like, if you just have a story you want to tell and the setting isn't important, then in some way make it important to the story. Like, I wanted to have a story in a flying city, so I better make the plot connected to the fact that it's a flying city. Because otherwise it's just like, why did you put it there? Why didn't you put it on, like, Earth? I don't know. It's like I want there to be a connection to the world building, to the story. You know?
Right. Yeah, it kind of I tried to, don't laugh, I actually tried to write like a legit romance novel once. Didn't go so well. But it was very important that it was the winter. You know, like a lot of things, 'cause, I mean, it was just a, normal, somewhere in the U.S. kind of story, but it was really important that it was the winter because it drove a lot of the choices of the characters.
Yeah, that's good. Colin?
I was going to go off the same thing, and also with Sanderson's err on the side of awesome. Not every fun world-building idea you come up with has a place in the story. And oftentimes I find myself adding things that are conflicting with each other just because they sounded cool to start with. So sometimes, as much as I hate world-building disease, you just got to sit back and take a knife to the parts of your story and find out which parts actually contribute to the plot and which parts are just you trying to have fun and acknowledging that sometimes they don't work.
Yeah, you reminded me of something, and also I think you're talking about killing your darlings instead of world building disease. And that's something that we're going to spend a lot of time on because it's important when you're trying to build a good story. But in a panel I watched that involved Jim Butcher, Pat Rothfuss, Mike Cole, Sam Sykes, and some other woman I can't remember. They're talking about world building, obviously, and Rothfuss said, it applies to romance too, or erotica. If you can tell that the author started to touch themselves, they went too far. And, just be aware of that and tone it down at the very least in your revisions and your edit.
Does Kvothe ever really face consequences?
He faces consequences all the time, so just not always bad ones.
Yeah, I think I'm really hoping in Doors of Stone?
Yeah.
That Kvothe actually, that Rothfuss cuts his darling.
Which, I think he gets a lot of shit because we don't know what he's doing yet, but I think Doors of Stone is going to be really terrible for Kvothe, and it's just going to, whenever that comes out, we'll see what he's actually meaning to do, because, otherwise the girl, I don't remember her name, Denna, I hate Denna.
Oh,
I despise Denna. but I have a feeling there's gonna be a point that I'm gonna be sympathetic to her, because otherwise he wouldn't make her quite so hateful.
Meanwhile, you take what's his name, Scott Lynch, and I don't think there's anyone short of Harry Dresden who faces as much bad luck as Locke Lamora. He just gets shit on.
I need to read those books. I read the first one, but not any of the other ones. And that's a very good story in general. I'll suggest to anyone, which is very high fantasy. It's very kind of his own method of doing urban fantasy in his own story, which was great, and it's hilarious, and he's witty, and it's really good.
Yeah, if you need a high fantasy example of a main character who doesn't win every scenario constantly.
Yeah.
That's one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and the magic system in that was hilariously unimportant until it was. I mean, like, it hinges on a simple truth at one point, and you believe it to be real until it's not. And I'm not going to spoil anything. And don't spoil the witty line either, because it was spoiled for me.
Oh, yeah, that's a good... I don't care how long that book's been out. That's a book that deserves to be read unspoiled.
Yes, specifically because, just because I knew what the line was, I got to see the entire setup. You need to go into that thing blind, and you can see how to pull off a really good joke. Humor is bad, and we need to talk about humor as well.
Yeah, for me, the one thing I would tell people is it's something I learned the very first paper, not, creative writing paper, just paper in general I wrote in college, is at some point, you just gotta stop. Like, you can work yourself to death and fret over every little detail, but you know what? It might be an A, it might be a B, but it's not going to get that much better sometimes. You just gotta put it, turn that paper in and move on. So that's what I feel like with all, especially just writing in general. It's like, just do it. Just get your writing going. Just, don't fret over every little detail. Those you can fix all those details in post.
Yes, and hold on to that idea of post, because you have to be able to revise things, especially if you have to kill your darlings or figure out reasons why world building happens or plot things happen and explain the world building things that you've chosen. And sometimes you need to take a lot of time in between your revisions so it seems new to you. So you get to go back after you've forgotten everything you've done and learn it again, and you get to see, did I show this enough? Did it make sense enough for it to go? And it's important that you go into it as much distance as possible. So,
yeah.
All right. Are we done?
I believe so, yes.
All right, it's time to plug everything, because otherwise Alex will yell at us.
Let's see. Broken Jars Broadcasting at gmail.com. What's the Twitter, Alex?
Broken Jars Pod for the Broken Jars Twitter.
Right, Broken Jars Pod. There's the High Fantasy Twitter.
Which is HI_fantasy_.
Yes, we have Broken Jars Broadcasting on Instagram, YouTube. If you like it, we probably have it. We've got a gaming podcast. We're about to start a nerd culture podcast. We've got podcasts about the show The Office, which is amazing. That's with yours truly and Jay Ray. We have the 42 podcast, which is me and Ryan, which is we kind of talk about everything. So if you want to come check us out, we have that's Broken Jars at XYZ online. We're on iTunes. We're on Google.
Did you mention the Dresden Files? Because I don't remember if you did.
The Dresden Files podcast.
Which is me.
Which is Alex. Colin isn't on a second podcast yet, but I'm sure that'll change eventually.
I'm going to pull him into Dresden since I know he's read it all. But that's about as far as plans for that goes.
But yeah, I think, so come check us out. Send us email, Twitter. I know, especially for the high fantasy, Alex is really active on that. If you tweet at the Broken Jars one, I will get to you really quickly. We would love to hear from you. Ideas, things you love, things you hate, things we should never ever do again because it's stupid. All that stuff that people tell us. We would love to hear from you. So please email us, tweet at us, comment on our YouTube. Don't really care. We'll talk to you.
Yep, we love interactions with people. That's why we record this and put this on the internet.
Indeed. Well, everyone say your goodbyes. Bye, everybody. Have a good night, good morning, or whatever, whenever you're listening to this. Hope it's good.
Yep, good time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.